$600 stimulus checks are going out, and the money could be showing up soon in your bank account. Brian Malahy asking questions about how this money is going to impact people in Utah. And Brian, you talked to some people today. What are they saying about this stimulus money?
One in particular who said it's helpful, it's better than nothing, but it doesn't appear to be having a great effect in terms of victory laps over $600. We're outside Anna's.
This is big news. Hundreds, if not thousands of checks are being sent out to the taxpayers. And everybody, the IRS has actually handed back to American people more than $100 billion. People will be getting stimulus money faster than we ever thought. And that's because of one thing. Even as tax experts are saying the tax refunds are likely to be smaller this year compared with the previous years, nearly half of all Americans say the tax refund will be critical to their household finance. And a new survey from Bankrate found that 40% of Americans say this year's funds is very important to their financial health, with another 32% saying it is somewhat important. That's 75% total compares with last year's 67% who said the refund was important too. The higher measure comes as the expiration of the emergency stimulus program, like the expanded child tax credit, comes to fruition. But with inflation and multi-decade highs and debt levels steadily climbing, Bankrate found that high levels of anxiety and are associated with how far those tax rates and refunds will ultimately go. It does mean that some problems can be created in Congress. Because as of February 24th, we do know that the IRS had issued over 35 million refunds, and 20% of the increase went from last year. But in all, the agency had handed back taxpayers a little more than $108 billion. Because according to the IRS, some 90% of eligible taxpayers should receive their refunds within 3 weeks of filing, that is, and setting up a direct deposit to your bank account just speeds things up, as paper checks can take 8 to 6 weeks to arrive. But the IRS stated, if you filed on paper, it may take 6 months or even more to process your tax return. And we don't want to wait that long for a stimulus check, we just don't. But the IRS has stated if you file it on paper, it may take 6 months. So I don't know what to do with the IRS, everybody, but we do know one thing. Here's how to claim your stimulus check. Here's how to get your Social Security benefits early, faster, quicker. The IRS is offering California taxpayers more time to file their taxes after the state was hit with a period of severe weather. And while Tuesday, April 18th, it's a tax filing deadline for most Americans, the IRS is now offering California residents in designated areas extra time to file. Because the IRS also says that if it's rolling on whether the California middle class tax refund rebate offered to residents should be considered taxable income, they had no comment on that. The IRS may have actually extended the tax filing deadline for most California taxpayers, but it doesn't mean that California taxpayers need to wait an extra month to get their tax refund. Yeah, so here's what Joe Biden is also saying about that. Well, leaders of the Republican minority at the Minnesota legislature have also rolled out a $13 billion fund. This is a $13 billion fund, everybody. It gives back to most of the states $17.5 billion fund as well.
Doing phenomenally well. Middle-class working families falling further and further behind. The American people are sick and tired of seeing multi-billionaires like Mr. Musk and Mr. Bezos and Mr. Branson taking joyrides to outer space in their spaceships, buying $500 million super yachts, and living in mansions all over the world, while some 600,000 people in our country are homeless. In other words, we're looking at two worlds. People on top never did better. Middle class continuing to decline, and the poor living in abysmal conditions. And in the midst of all of this, the American people want Congress, want their elected officials to address corporate greed, to address income and wealth inequality, and end a tax system in which some of the wealthiest people in this country in a given year do not pay a nickel in federal taxes, where large profitable corporations do not pay a nickel in federal taxes. And they want a tax system which is fair, where the wealthy and large corporations pay their fair share. Madam President, the last poll that I saw had Congress, United States Congress, with a 16%
Act, the largest investment ever by Legions in climate change, and it'll lower the cost of prescription drugs, reduce inflation, and the national deficit by $300 billion. It's truly a once-in-a-generation bill, and I was proud to lead the charge to get that done. But this is only one of a list of many incredible accomplishments we were able to achieve in the last 5 weeks. With a 50-50 margin in the Senate.
Big changes have just been made. Millions of people may see a benefit increase very soon. That's if a new bill is signed into law. Schumer has officially announced what President Biden's new stimulus package will include, and as well who will receive this check. Now, earlier this week, Bernie Sanders criticized the Inflation Reduction Act for doing little to fight inflation and not enough to help Americans that are struggling to afford healthcare, childcare, and housing. Bernie Sanders declared on the Senate floor that according to the Congressional Budget Office and other economic organizations that have studied this bill, it will have a minimal impact on inflation. Now, this line of criticism echoed what some Republicans have said for days, and pointing to analysis concluding the bill will have a negligible impact on inflation. Bernie Sanders argued that the bill falls short for what is needed when Americans are growing disillusioned with the government and a tiny fraction of wealthy individuals own a disproportionate share of the nation's wealth. Bernie Sanders' rebuttal pointed to a lower standard of living among many young people. Now, Bernie Sanders' biggest complaint is that the bill doesn't give Medicare enough authority to negotiate lower prescription prices. He said the good news is that the bill will allow Medicare to negotiate prices with the pharmaceutical industry, but the bad news is the provision does not go into effect for 4 years, at which times only 10 prescriptions will be covered. Now, Bernie Sanders also said that he plans to offer 3 other amendments to the bill related to prescription Medicare. One amendment would expand Medicare to provide dental, vision, and hearing benefits. Another would provide $30 billion to establish a conservation corps to combat climate change. But now Chuck Schumer said that Democrats reduced part of the proposed minimum tax on huge corporations and made other changes in their gigantic economic bill. Schumer told reporters that Democrats dropped proposed tax boosts on hedge fund executives after pitiful centrist Senator Sinema said she would otherwise vote no. Schumer said that in its place, the measure now has new tax on the shared companies' buyback of their own stock, netting the government far more revenue. Schumer initially was against the charge, but stated that Sinema said she would not vote for the bill or even vote to let debate begin unless private equity tax was removed from legislation, so they had no choice. In another change, Schumer said a proposed 15% minimum tax on mammoth corporations had been trimmed and would now raise $258 billion over the coming decade.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Madam